All right. I think we're going to get started because, as I just mentioned, I'm going to do a bit of a chazara because we started yesterday on Daf Chof Amud Beis. Not yesterday, I mean on Friday. We started on Friday, the third chapter. That was on Daf Chof Amud Beis. And we managed to cover quite a bit of ground. We got to Daf Chof Beis Amud Aleph, 22a. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review of what we did. And then we're going to pick up from Chof Beis Amud Aleph, 6 lines down, Mai Ika Bein Derova. Okay, that's where we're going to start from. But I'm going to do a brief review. The Mishnah starts out.
Wait, where again?
Well, I'm going to review from the beginning of the chapter.
Okay.
But when we pick up the Gemara inside, we're going to pick up from Chof Beis Amud Aleph, 22.
Okay.
On 6 lines down. Okay. So we have mentioned that there are special stringencies and safeguards that were created by the rabbis to protect the tahara of different types of sacred items, and we said that there are different levels of these stringencies, and here we're going to mention 11 stringencies that you have by kodesh over truma, which means truma you only have to keep certain stringencies, but there are 11 extra stringencies when it comes to kodesh that do not exist by truma, and these are them. Number one, we do not immerse vessels inside of another vessel. So let's say I have a big chicken soup pot, and I'm going to put in a smaller pot, and I want to put it inside the bigger pot to tovel it. The answer is one shouldn't do that. That's one way to understand it. Another way to understand it is whether you could put it into a basket and lower it down into the mikvah. So we say we don't allow this by kodesh, although we do allow it by truma. And we'll see that there's different reasons given in the Gemara as to why this is not allowed. The second thing is with regards to the different parts of a vessel. You have the outside, the inside, and the handle. Whether or not when you touch one part, do all the other parts become tamei or not? We say by kodesh we add that extra stringency, whereas by truma we don't. And then we mentioned the third thing is that somebody who is carrying a midras. So if, let's say, you pick up a piece of clothing that has been worn or stepped upon by a zav, so now it's a midras, and you carry it with one hand, are you allowed to carry something else with the other hand, like a barrel of wine or something with the other hand? So for truma, you are allowed to if it's truma, but you're not allowed to do that if it's kodesh. And we'll see another stringency, which will kind of explain why this might be a problem. The next thing is, we said that with regards to the garments of those who eat truma, this becomes like a midras for those who eat kodesh. So therefore, the person would then have to go and immerse himself. The next thing we say is that unlike the rule of kodesh, by truma, we say that a person, well, let's first say what you cannot do when it comes to a kodesh. With the kodesh, what you have to do is you have to release any knots, undo any knots, even if they're loose knots. You have to undo them. You have to dry them, and then you need to immerse them, and afterwards you can tie them back up. Why? We're concerned that even if there's a loose knot, it might serve as a chatzitza, which means an interposition, preventing all the water from getting to everywhere and every spot. And likewise, if it's not yet completely dry, maybe the water that's already on it, the wetness on it, will prevent it from receiving the water of the mikvah. But with truma, we say that no, you're even not only do you not need to undo the knot, you can actually make a loose knot and you can still immerse it. We also say that with regards to vessels that before their completion, they started to be protected, and that means that when I say the completion, when you make a vessel, right, the only time it becomes susceptible to receive and contract tumah is once it's a finished product. So if you wake up one day and you say, oh, today I'm finishing this cup. From this point on, I'm going to make sure no tumah comes anywhere near it, that it should not contract any tumah. We say that for teruma, that's fine. But with kodesh, you once you complete the vessel, you would still need to immerse it before using it. And there's a reason why, but the Mishnah doesn't mention it explicitly, so we'll just keep going. And then we say, with regards to a vessel, like a basket, and it has within it small different, whether it's fruits or other things, the basket itself would connect all of the things inside it, so that if one thing becomes tummy, everything becomes tummy. That's by kodesh, but not by truma. And we say another stringency is that with regards to kodesh, it goes even to be a revi'i, to a fourth level of truma, whereas by truma it only goes to a shlishi. And likewise, when it comes to truma, right, if one of your hands become impure through a rabbinically ordained tuma, then you only have to rinse or immerse that one hand. But the other hand, the second hand that was not that you did not touch the tumah with, does not become tummy. Whereas when it comes to kodesh, we say both your hands become tummy. If you touch one thing with your hand, with regards to kodesh, you're going to have to immerse both hands. The next thing we said is when it comes to eating, sacred foods, right? We know that the reason why we wash our hands is because we do not want to pass on tumah to the food, and then the food becomes invalid. However, that would only be a concern once the food has been prepared to now be susceptible to tumah. So therefore, if, for example, you had a fruit that had never been washed with the intention of making it now prepared to receive tumah, if I touch that apple with tameh hands, that apple does not become tameh. So when it comes to truma, we say that if it was still in a state where it has not yet been made susceptible to receive tumah, then you can eat it without washing your hands. Whereas when it comes to kodesh, that makes no difference, because there's a principle that chibas ha-kodesh, because kodesh is so cherished, it then that itself prepares it to be susceptible to tumah and doesn't need to have the extra step of coming into contact with one of the 7 liquids to make it ready to receive the tumah. And then we said another issue is the oinen and the mechusik purim, which are which the rabbi said they need to have an extra immersion before eating something of kodesh. The reason is because although technically they are still tahor, because they never came into contact with the tumah, but nevertheless, because there was an averting of their mind from being careful, because they knew that they were not eligible at that time to consume kodesh, therefore, when that time comes that they now eligible to eat kodesh, they would have to immerse themselves once more. That we apply for the inyan of kodesh, but we do not apply it to truma. That is the list of the extra stringencies that the rabbis made with regards to kodesh and not with regards to truma. Again, this is only with regards to tumah that was contracted, that is only rabbinically considered to be tameh, but not biblically. If it were biblically, then all these differentiations would make would have no place, because once you become tameh, your entire body becomes tameh, and you'd have to go to mikvah. Okay, so we asked the question: why is it that we make stringencies with regards to kodesh and not for truma? In other words, if I'm coming along and saying that I'm going to take a vessel that has become impure rabbinically, and I'm going to immerse it into a mikvah, right, in order to give it this purity, I say for truma it's a valid immersion, and I say for kodesh it's an invalid immersion. But how would that make sense? Why? Why would it be kosher for one and not kosher for the other? What is the suspicion that you have that you go to a further extreme by kodesh that you don't go to by truma. So the Gemara answers that according to one opinion, Reb Ilah, he says it's because of the weight of the vessel. The weight of the vessel might cause a hatzitza, an interposition between the water and the vessel. Okay, so since we are worried about that, that's why a person is not allowed to do that for kodesh. Why are you allowed to do it for truma? Because in truth, in all likelihood, the water will get everywhere. It's just a very distant suspicion that it won't. So in order to create a heightened sense of sensitivity for kodesh, we say an extra stringency with regards to kodesh, that you cannot immerse a vessel inside of another vessel. So the Gemara says, 1 second, if this is the reason, then you've mentioned a number of cases in the Mishnah. If you're saying the reason for the first case of the baskets inside the vessel inside of a vessel is because you're worried about an interposition, a chatzitza, we have at the end of in the sefer of the Mishnah, you also have a particular instance where we say you cannot do it by kodesh, even though you can do it by truma, and it's for the very same reason, for chatzitza, and that was with the tying of the knot. So why would we assume that both cases are talking about chatzitza? Yes.
When you put a kli in a kli, when you put a vessel in a vessel, there must be somewhere where the one is touching the other. And that's the place where the chatzitza takes place.
That's
because
true.
There is no border in between.
That is true. However, as we will see soon in the Gemara will say that there is this idea that when you put one vessel inside of another vessel and they go into a mikvah, the water lifts up the other vessel and it floats inside for a little bit, right? Even if it ultimately
No,
does.
it's not right. It depends how heavy the vessel is.
Well, that's correct. That is correct. But what we're saying is, let's always remember, we're not talking to people who are looking to do things the wrong way. We're talking to people who are looking to do things the right way. But we're saying that even though you're going to try to do it the right way, there's a far-fetched concern that maybe there will be a chatzitza, there will still be a chatzitza when it comes to one vessel inside of another. And that's why we're telling you, when it comes to kodesh, don't do it that way. Each one should be done separately. Okay, so he says like this. He says like this. According to Rav Ilah, the Gemara says, we need to have both cases. The case of the chatzitza about the weight, and the case of the chatzitza about the knot. Why? Because if I wouldn't have said both of them, each one has a particular side that I would assume that only applies in that case and not in the other case. In the case of the weight, so when it comes to the weight of the vessels, that wouldn't apply to the knot in the water, right? Whereas, so therefore I needed to mention the second case. But if I would have only said the case with the knot, then I would have thought that a knot, what happens with a knot in the water is because the water can sometimes expand the material, right? And in a sense, tighten the knot in some way. So you have this extra concern, which we don't have by vessels, because and the fact when a vessel goes into the water, the one floats from the other. It doesn't become heavier. It actually becomes a little bit lighter. If you ever try carrying somebody in the water or carrying them outside of the water, it's much lighter when it's in the water, right? So therefore, there may be a certain leniency in that case. That's why we have to mention both. That was according to Rav Ilah, and we say that Rav Ilah actually counts our Mishnah, instead of counting 11 different stringencies, he says there's only 10. 5 of them are stringencies that we apply to both anything that is kodesh and anything that even was chulin but was prepared al taras kodesh. Excuse me. And the last 5 we say only apply to things that are kodesh, but not things that were prepared al taras kodesh. And we explained the reason is because anything that the rabbis made a particular decree because they were concerned about a distant possibility of tumah, according to a deraisa, they made an extra decree, whether both for kodesh and chulin al tarsa kodesh. But when it comes to the last five, because they were things that were completely rabbinic, there would never ever be a concern about even a far-fetched case where this could come to a tumah deraisa, biblical tumah. Therefore, they never made a gezerah. So that's what we said with regards to Rabbi Ilah. But Rava comes along and he says that he disagrees with Rabbi Ilah. He says, actually, the first case of the Mishnah is not the same as the last case of the case of the knot, which means to say the concern isn't chatzitza, it's what's called a gezerah. What does that mean? It's gezerah. It means I'm not worried about the actual deed of putting one pot into the mikveh inside of another pot. That's not my concern, because in all likelihood, there's no concern about chatzitza whatsoever in that case. So then, what's my concern? My concern is that if I allow this, you may come to do something else, which is problematic. So the immersion of a vessel inside of a vessel is not problematic. The problem is you might do something else, which is problematic. What's that? So he explains that the reason why we don't allow it is because a person is not allowed to immerse small needles or spinning hooks into a vessel that doesn't have an opening that is the size of a skin bottle's tube, which is 2 fingers, so that you could turn them around. That's how big the hole has to be. What does that mean? It means like this. I don't want to lose my needles, right? If I put them in a big basket or I put them in a big pot, they're going to go all over the place, right? And then they're going to stick to the bottom and I've lost them. So therefore, what am I going to do? I'm going to take a small bottle, and the bottle is going to have a very small opening, and I'll put the needles in there. And this way, they're not going to go, when the water goes into the bottle, they're not going to go flying all over the place, and I won't lose them. But the problem is, if you're doing that, what you're doing is you're creating a separate mikvah. You're creating a bottle that now becomes its own mikvah. Why? Because we say that when you try to connect mikvahs, and here we got into a whole discussion about how you have 2 pits when you have a mikvah, one that has the 40 sa'ah of rainwater, and then the other that has regular water, and the way you connect them is through a hole or a pipe that connects the 2 waters. And when you have that wall or pipe that connects the 2 waters, the opening has to be at least the size of 2 fingers that you can turn around completely. Now, we're worried, and so therefore, if it has less than that size, then the 2 mikvahs are not considered to have been really connected to one another. Each one is a separate bar. If that's the case, I take a bottle and I put in it all these needles, and I put the bottle into the mikvah. I'm creating like a mikvah within a mikvah, right? And if the hole is not the size of 2 fingers, what's going to happen? It's not going to be valid. So the reason why I don't want you to immerse one vessel inside of another vessel is because you might think, once you've already allowed me to immerse one vessel inside of another vessel, I'm going to immerse my needles by putting it into a bottle, and that's not allowed. And so that therefore the case of the immersing a vessel inside of a vessel and the case of tying a knot are actually 2 separate concerns. And so Rava says that there are actually 11 stringencies then of kodesh that we don't apply to truma. And we say that this is like what Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba Ba'avua, that there are 11 different stringencies. The 6 first ones is both with regards to kodesh and to chulin that was made and prepared according to kodesh, and the last ones are only for kodesh but not for chulin that were prepared al taras kodesh. This is where we got up to And now we continue on Daf Chof Beis Amud Aleph. If there are any questions before we go on, I'm happy to listen to them, and if I can answer them, I'll try to answer them. But if not,
I have one question.
Yes.
When we started out, you said there were three things that you are talking about, and one was lo samim kli betoch kli acher,
okay.
and I have the third one, but I don't have the second one. The third one about the clothes that are not tahor, and you carry something in one hand and you cannot carry the kodesh in the other.
There weren't three. There were 11. There were 11. The Mishnah goes through 11.
I know, but you said you started with three. And what was number two?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Okay.
I'll read it through and then, okay.
Okay. So the Gemara says, now, you have two opinions. You have the opinion of Rava and you have the opinion of Rav Ilah. What is the practical difference between these two opinions? In other words, are there any halachic ramifications if I go with the opinion of Rav Ilah or the opinion of Rava? Meaning to say, just to say that the Mishnah does mention that the Mishnah mentions 11 stringencies or 10 stringencies because two are really the same concern is not much of a difference. But if you're going to tell me there's going to be a halachic difference, then that's a real difference. So that's what the Gemara is asking. Is there a real difference between whether I go according to Rava or I go according to Rav Ilah? So he says like this: there is a practical difference between them, and that is if you have a case of sal gargusni shemilon kalim vitbilon. You have either a big basket or a strainer that one filled with vessels and immersed it. Okay, so now if you understand what we're talking about, you have let's say, the big baskets that they provide you at the mikvah with, right? Now those have big holes, right? They have big, it's like a net, right? But like with big holes because you're not worried about big vessels falling through the cracks, right? So if you have this big basket or big strainer, right, and I filled that with other vessels. So according to Rabbi Law, who said that the concern is chatzitza, I'm still worried about that because the pressure of the vessels is still, it doesn't matter how big the holes are, there's going to be parts of the vessel at the bottom that are going to be touching the vessels that you put in it. So there's still a concern of the chatzitza. However, the man Oma, according to the one who says that's Rava, that the reason why we don't allow it is because of the decree Shemayat Mechotin V'Tzineiris, B'Klishein B'Fiv Shreifers Anoid. But the reason why we don't allow it in our Mishnah is because we're worried about a person who's going to come to immerse needles and spinning hooks within a vessel whose opening is not the size of that two fingers that turn around, right? Which is the size of the leather bottle's tube. So then, if that's the case, we would not make a gzeira. With this particular basket. Why? Because none of these baskets have holes that are smaller than the two fingers that are required. So therefore, in that case, I wouldn't make an extra gzeira. Okay. So now, salvegar gusni she'em b'fikshvers hanoid leka, because there's no basket or large strainer whose opening is not the size of this two fingers that we said. So therefore, according to Rava, it'd be permitted to immerse the vessels within a basket or a large strainer, even for kodesh, because yes.
But the top of the basket is a large opening.
Yeah, that's correct.
So why it's not missing? There is a large opening between the basket and the
that's what. So we're saying in that case, with those baskets, right, Rava would say that there's no concern. So according to Rava, there would be no problem. According to Rav Ilah, there would be a problem because we're still worried about chatzitza. Whether you're talking about one kind of a basket or another kind of a basket or another kind of a vessel, it makes no difference. right? So therefore, you'd have a practical difference. And now the Gemara comes along and says that we actually have a source where we see that this is Rava's view. Rava, who explains that the reason why you cannot immerse a vessel within a vessel is because of the needles and the spinning hooks that you might put in a small vessel whose opening is not big enough. We see the Amar Rava, like Rava says, Sal v'gargusni, a basket or a large strainer, shemilon kelen, that you filled up with vessels, with bilon, and you immerse them tar in. He says clearly that they're tar. So here we see that this would be a practical difference between him and Rabbi Ilah, because Rabbi Ilah would say that it's not okay because he's still concerned about chatzitza. Now, I got stuck on this, but maybe somebody else here can help me with this. I'm just going to read it the way I understand it, and you'll help me. This is not related. It's only related because we're talking about the same kind of material, but it's not related to the halacha that we just mentioned. He says over here, according to Rava, mikvah shechilkai besal v'gargusni. If one took a mikvah and you divided the mikvah with a basket or a large strainer, which means that you took the material that you would use for these baskets and you made out of it a partition and you put it down in the middle of a mikvah, somebody who immerses in one of the two sides of the mikvah, which initially only had 40 saw, also like tefillah, that immersion is not effective for him because you've now basically divided the mikvah, not allowing for there to be 40 saw together, but 20 saw in each one. So therefore, if you go and immerse in either side, it's no longer good.
What's the reason they would divide a mikvah?
Well, why would they do it? I'm not sure. Again, it doesn't always have to be a reason for it. The question we want to know is, technically speaking, would it be valid?
Would it be kosher? Yeah.
The question is, you just mentioned to me that it has these like holes, right? So therefore the water can get through. So why is it not kosher? So he says the reason why it's not kosher is because although there are holes, the ha'ara kulu chalchule mechalala, because the entire ground is full of holes. 1 second, let me just finish over here. And yet we require that there be 40 saw of water in one place, which means like this. If I have a mikvah that I dug out from the ground and I filled it with less than 40 saw, a little bit less than 40 saw, let's say, do I say that because this pit that I dug, right? Let's say the water, right, is coming from the river. I don't know, it's coming from the river. I dig a hole, and the hole is only big enough to fill up 35 saw, let's argue, and then I close it back up, right? I close up the hole, right? Now, the earth still has pores, right? So water can still come in, right? So since we don't say that there are holes and pores in the earth, and therefore technically this is still connected to a larger body of water, and therefore just connect it to the rest of the water, and then you for sure have more than 40 saw, we say you need to have 40 saw in one space. So therefore we see if the earth, which has pores, serves as a barrier, so therefore this basket or strainer material is going to serve as a partition. I think the only way I can understand this is if we say that this strainer or this basket material that we're putting in have holes that are less than the 2 fingers. Because if there are holes bigger than the 2 fingers, then it just doesn't make sense. Like, why would it not be kosher? It has to be saying that it has less than that these holes are less than 2 fingers wide. That's the only way it makes sense.
That's true.
1 second. If Rashi says, also late tefillah, base mikvahs, when a person made this one mikvah, like two mikvahs, the ain shear loy bazev loy bazeh, you don't have enough in either one. In other words, each one has like 20. Af al pisha mayim mechabram ben avir hanetzorim ain ze chibur. Even though there are holes that are formed in the net, so they should be able to connect. Nevertheless, it's not a chibur. To me, it has to be that the holes are not big enough. That's the problem. Okay, let me get up.
Yeah, that's the problem, because when we talked about the river that has three mikvahs, 20, 40, and 20, the water is connecting them.
Right, the water. Okay, but that's something else.
But with baskets, if the hole is not big enough,
we're asking whether or not the net. Look, the water definitely gets through. That's the thing. The water definitely gets through. It's not as if the water doesn't get through.
But the holes are not big enough.
Oh, so the holes are not big enough. So if the holes are not big, if the holes are not big enough, then that's why it's not kosher. But again, it doesn't seem that the second halacha is very much connected to the main point that we're trying to bring out. The main point we're trying to bring out is that Rava elsewhere says clearly that when you have a basket or a strainer that you filled with other vessels and you put them into the mikvah, that they are tahar. So that's the purpose of bringing this down. Okay. Says the Gemara Vaita. Says the Gemara Vaita. Vahani mili. So when we say, right, that you take a vessel that you immerse it within another vessel smaller than 2 fingers, that it's not kosher. When do we say that? We say that only bikli tahar, when the outer vessel is tahar, which means to say like this: if I come along and I take needles and I put them into a vessel that has an opening that is less than 2 fingers, when is it not valid? If the outer vessel is tahar. Why? Because then the outer vessel itself is not trying to become tahar, right? So therefore, it will now serve as, so to speak, a separate mikvah and a barrier to be able to become tahar. But if I put it into a bottle that I anyway want to immerse, I want to take this bottle, right? If you take a bottle here, I have a bottle over here, right? See this bottle? So let's say this top is too small. What happens if I want to take this bottle itself and I want to make it kosher, right? If I want to make this kosher itself, there's only one way to do it. Put it in the mikvah, right? And it's going to be kosher. I'm not going to say because it's got a small hole, it's not going to become kosher. Because otherwise, how else am I going to do it? It's not becoming its own mikvah when you're putting it into the mikvah to make it tar. You're going to put it in, and even though it's got a small hole, you're going to hold it down until all the water gets in, right? And it's fully immersed in the water, and it becomes tar. So in that case, says the Gemara, that when I'm putting the needles, let's say, into a kli that is tamei, so migu desalka tvila lekule gufa demana, since the immersion is effective for the entire body of the outer vessel, right, including the inside of that vessel, which needs to become tar, so salkaluhu dami lekelim de ispe, it's also going to be effective for the vessels that are inside of it. Okay, you understand what we're saying? So in other words, yes, it's true. We said that in general, we have a principle that you cannot immerse needles or spinning hooks, whatever it might be, inside of another vessel if it doesn't have the right size. That's only when the outer vessel is tar. But if the outer vessel is tamei, then it would be a valid immersion, because just like it itself has to become tar, it also will, and the inside of it has to become tar. So too the needles inside of it would also be tar. And we bring a support from this. We see this in a Mishnah, the Tanan. We've learned in a Mishnah, Kalim shemilon, Kalim vihit bilon, if vessels were filled with other vessels, and and then a person immersed them, so they become tar. And here we don't make a differentiation between what size the opening is, which means any vessel, if you put other vessels in it and you immerse it, then it's kosher. However, if you did not immerse the vessel, mayim hamuravim, then the water that is mingled, unless they are mingled through the size of these two fingers. Now, that ending of the Mishnah sounds garbled. What do you mean if I didn't immerse it? Then the water mingled. What are you talking about? If I didn't immerse it and then the water mingled and it has to be a certain size of the two fingers, that whole thing doesn't make sense. What do you mean? What do you mean in the Mishnah if you did not immerse it? Rather, this is what he's really saying in the Mishnah. That just like what we said before, it doesn't mean that you didn't immerse it, actually. It means when you put it into the water, you didn't need to put it into the water. You're not putting it into the water to make it itself tahar. In other words, if you did not need to immerse the outer vessel, then umayim hamoiravim, now we say you want the water of the mikvah to be effective inside the bottle, inside the vessel, and then it has to be then the waters are not going to be considered connected unless the waters are mingled through the opening of the size of the skin's bottle tube, which is that two fingers. Okay, so here we have a proof from a Mishnah saying what we've just asserted, that although we say generally you're not allowed to put needles into a vessel that doesn't have an opening at least 2 fingers wide, that's only when you don't want the outer vessel to receive its own immersion and tahara. But if that is what you're looking for, then it would count even for if the hole is smaller than 2 fingers. It says the Gemara, the truth is, this argument between Rava and Rabbi Loi, right, is actually a dispute between the Tanoim, the Tanya, stored in the Braisa.
But I see the reasoning for that.
What do you mean?
I see if you are not using the vessel to do it tahor itself, the vessel itself,
yeah,
it's really only a mikvah, a separate mikvah for the needles.
That's correct.
That's the reason they don't accept it unless it's 2 fingers deep.
That's correct. However, once you're using the vessel to immerse it itself, right, then we're not going to consider it a separate entity.
Right.
Right. Okay. So now we say that this machlok is between Rava and Rabbi Law is actually a machlok is Tanoim. Tanya, it was told in the Braisa, Salve Gargusni, Shemilon, Kalim, Vitmilon, one fill the basket, or a large strainer with vessels, and then immerse them. Bein lekodesh, bein letruma toirin. Then, whether it's for kodesh or for the purpose of truma, they are tahor. That sounds like who? That sounds like Rava, right? Rava says that kalim is fine. Abba Shol says letruma, they only become tar for truma avolei lekodesh, which sounds like Rabbi Law, who says that it's not valid, and the reason why it's not valid is because of the concern of chatzitza. Okay, so now, if we're going to say that there's a real concern about the validity of immersing a keli inside of a keli, so then why is it only not allowed for kodesh, truma nami? It should also be not allowed for truma. Yeah, you understand the question? The question is, if you have a real concern, then why do you allow it for truma? And for the Gemara, answer the question with a question. Lemad ka'amrinan. When we come along and we teach all these halachas about the extra stringencies for kodesh over truma, who are we speaking about? We're speaking about people. We're talking to people who are careful about these laws. Says the Gemara, chaverim. we're speaking to chaverim. What is a chaver? Chaver is somebody who's knowledgeable and careful with these laws. Chaverim made the yadei. So chaverim are completely knowledgeable about the laws of immersion. So therefore, it's not necessary to make a rule for them that they should not immerse vessels within a vessel for truma. They will know this on themselves, by themselves, that they shouldn't do that. So 1 second, if you're saying that's the case, if so, kodesh nami. So why are you coming along in the Mishnah telling me about kodesh that they should make this extra stringency if they already know the stringency from truma? And for the Gemara, because in the case of kodesh, we're concerned that an am oretz may see him immersing a vessel within a vessel for kodesh, and then the am oretz may do the same, and he would do so in other vessels and make it a problem for use for kodesh. So because we don't want that to happen, therefore we make we make a gezerah for the chaver that he shouldn't immerse vessels within other vessels for kodesh. Frank the Gemara, 1 second, I don't understand your logic. You're telling me you're worried about somebody watching a chaver do things right because he's not going to do things wrong. What do I mean? For example, if we go according to Rava's argument is the reason why we don't allow for a vessel inside of a vessel is because there's a gezerah with regards to
kodesh.
less than two, but less than 2 fingers, right? So the chaver is going to do it right, for kodesh, and then an Amaris is going to watch him immersing a vessel within a vessel, and so therefore he's going to come and he's going to do the same thing but the wrong way. So therefore we prevent the chaver from doing this only when with regards to kodesh. Why don't I have the same concern when it comes to truma? That's what Mark's going to ask. Truma not to have a chazele. When it comes to truma, we're also going to, we should also be concerned because the Amars will also see the guy doing it, immersing, he'll see the chaver immersing one vessel in another vessel, and then he'll also go and immerse vessels within another vessel for the use of truma, and that's going to be a problem. So therefore the Mishnah should come along and prohibit also immersing a utensil within a utensil for truma. And for the Gemara, no, it's not a problem. Why? Because when a Amma Oretz comes and he brings his truma, let me come to Menayu. We're not going to accept the truma from an Amma Oretz, because we assume that if an Amma Oretz brings you truma, in all likelihood, he has invalidated that truma by making it tamei. So therefore, we're not worried about his kalim or anything else. We're not going to accept the truma from an Amma Oretz. Okay, if you're not going to accept the truma from Amma Oretz, so 1 second, kodesh nami lo nikabel minayu. So don't accept the kodesh from him either, right? Why are you going to come along and say that I'm not going to accept the truma, and therefore I don't have to worry about the chaver doing something, and then the Amma Oretz following and doing the same thing with regards to truma, because I'm not going to accept the truma from the Amma Oretz to begin with. Very nice. So don't accept the kodesh from the Amma Oretz either. And for the Gemara, very interesting answer. Havalei Eva, because here we are forced, so to speak, to accept kodesh from the Amma Oretz because of Eva. Eva is that there shouldn't be any animosity between the Amma Oretz and everybody else. What does that mean? What's the difference between truma and kodesh? So the Gemara said, that's what the Gemara asked. But truma name have le'eva. If I'm not going to accept truma from the Amoretz, I'm also going to create animosity, because all of a sudden I no longer treat you like everybody else. I'm a kohen, and I'm going to accept this person's truma, and I'm not going to accept your truma because you're Amoretz. Of course, it's going to create animosity. And for the Gemara, no. That doesn't concern the Amma Oretz if you're not going to take his his truma. Why? The ozil yahiv lelekayin amaretz chamrei. He can go and give his truma to a kayin who's an amaretz, who is not careful about these particulars, and so therefore he's not going to be so offended if you don't take it. Somebody else will take it. However, when it comes to kodesh, there's only one Beis Hamikdash. Okay, and if you turn away the Amoretz and you're not going to accept his kodesh, then it's real Ava because he's got nowhere else to turn, as we'll see in a minute. Says the Gemara, Man Tana Dechayesh Ava. Who's the Tana of our Mishnah that's concerned about this animosity between us and the Amoretz? He says Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi. Because Rabbi Yossi, it's Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya is torn in the Brisa. It says, I was like, Rabbi Yossi said, why are all beliefs concerning the tahara of wine and oil for kachim, that is, throughout the year, right? L'chaira, I shouldn't be trusting an Amoretz. Why do I trust him for wine and oil with regards to bringing up with the sacrifices? Because we're really concerned that if I turn you down and I say I'm not accepting your wine and I'm not accepting your oil for the Beis Hamikdash, then they'll say, okay, have a good life. I'm going to go build my own bama, my own altar, and I'll bring up my own sacrifices, which is a terrible thing. And we don't want that to happen. And not just that, he's going to say, forget about it. You guys don't accept me. You guys don't trust me. So therefore, you know what? I'll go off. I'll build my own altar. I'll get my own red heifer, and I'll do everything myself, because we don't want that. So therefore, we make a particular leniency when it comes to the wine and the oil of kodesh that you want to use for kodesh, right? And the reason why we do that is because there's no alternative, and we don't want him to go and build his we don't want him to go and build his own altar and his own and make his own paraduma. But here's what you have to understand: we're not talking about when you see a guy touching a dead body and then bringing oil and wine to the Beis Hamikdash. Obviously, then we'll tell him, "I'm sorry, we cannot accept it because you just contracted tumah and you made this tummy." We're saying whether or not we assume, in other words, the basic premise and assumption is that anything that you touch is tamei, because you're never careful. So we're going to say that we don't make that assumption with regards to kodesh, and we're going to assume that if you come along and say, here's wine and here's oil, and I was careful with it, and it is pure, that we accept your testimony about your own wine and your own oil, so that we don't cause this animosity again. But that's only not applying the extra stringency of assuming everything is invalid. Okay. Rav Papa says, "Come on, in accordance with who do we accept the testimony of from an Amoretz?" The Gemara, come on, like who? Rabbi Yossi. It's in accordance with Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara, 1 second. You've just explained quite well, I must say. You've explained why I'm concerned about truma, but I'm not concerned about kachim, because when it comes to kachim, right? When it comes to kachim, we say we don't have a choice, right? But with truma, we could turn him down, and because we could turn him down, we can have that extra stringency, and we can no longer, and we don't have to worry about ava or animosity or anything else. However, if that's the case, let us be concerned for the possibility of a chaver's borrowing from an Amoretz vessel that he's going to use for truma. 1 second. Sorry. We've learned in the Mishnah, it says in the Mishnah, Kli cheres matil alakol. An earthenware vessel protects all substances from becoming tummy. And what does this mean? This is a very interesting halacha. A tzamid pastel means, right? You have a kli cheres. A kli cheres, if it has been sealed tight, shut, then although there may be tumah around it, and it itself might become tamei, right? Because of tumas mess. Nevertheless, the things that are inside it remain tahor. Okay, so if I have a cup, my favorite kais or Pesach, right? Then I keep it inside a kli cheres and I shut it tight, and then it then becomes tamei. Then what I say is that which is inside it remains tahor. How so? We say that this earthenware vessel protects all substances from becoming tamei. Also, there's another halacha, and that is if I have a mess, I have some not a mess, but a dead person, right? Mess, a corpse, in one on one floor, and then I have a I guess a floor on top of it, like a complete roof on top of it, and there's a hole, and I take this earthenware vessel and I put it into the hole, right? If I put it into the hole, it prevents the tumah from going further up. It stops the whole tumah. This is the halacha. So Divrei Beis Hillel says that this earthenware vessel protects all substances. However, Beis Shammai says Einei Matzil, it doesn't protect or it doesn't save al oichlim al mashkim al clay cheres. It protects only foods, beverages, and other earthenware vessels from becoming tamei. It does not, however, protect non-earthenware vessels from becoming tamei. Now, what are we talking about over here? One second. Let's keep going for a minute. Let's keep going in the Mishnah. Amar lahem Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, mipnei ma? Why do you make a distinction between foods, liquids, and earthenware and the others, right? Other vessels which are not protected by this earthenware vessel. Omer Beis Shammai says the reason why we make this distinction between food, liquid, and earthenware vessels and other vessels, and we say that those other vessels do not remain tar, is mipneshu tamei al gabe am haaretz, because the earthenware vessel that you would have protected from, that you would have, that you want to protect the non-earthenware vessels from tumah, is tamei on account of an am haaretz. And the law is that a vessel which itself is tamei cannot interpose between a tamei mace and things that you want to protect from tar. In other words, like this, what I said before a minute ago, that you take a kli cheres, an earthenware vessel, and you put it in, and you try to make a chatzitza. You fill up a hole that was allowing the tumah to go through, and you make that chatzitza. When does that work? That only would work if the kli itself is tahar. But if that kli is tamei, right? If that kli is tamei, then what happens is it cannot serve as the chatzitza. So therefore, Beis Shammai says that's the reason why I make a difference between the food, the liquid, and
Rabbi,
other earthenware. Yes,
but a kli cheres, we
Yes.
know that the inside is tahor as long as you do not suspend something in the airspace, right?
Correct.
So even if you were in an ohel, as long as the kli cheres is closed up on top and you have something that's tahor inside, tum'ah doesn't get in.
That's true, but that's what you're talking about when the kli cheres itself is tahor, right? But what if
No,
we're
kli
saying,
cheres on the outside could be tameh, but its mouth and its inside is tahor.
but what we're saying is that it's a kli cheres of an amaretz, and if the kli cheres of an amaretz, right? Then we assume that there's been something that made it tummy from the inside, right? Because he wasn't careful. So because he wasn't careful, so we're not going to allow because we assume that he's not careful, we're not going to allow for the kli cheres to protect everything on the inside. So we're making a differentiation between which things we do allow and we don't allow. And the Gemara is going to come along and bring very sharp rebuke against this opinion, although the opinion will ultimately be upheld and be proven to be a good reason. But what we're saying right now is that the reason why it doesn't provide complete protection, which Beis Hillel was of the opinion that it provides complete protection. Beis Shammai says it doesn't provide complete protection because of the Kli of Amaretz. And a Kli of Amaretz, which is going to be Tamei, that is not going to serve as a proper chatzitza to stop the tumor from going further. So Amru Lahem, Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, have you not declared the food and the liquids inside of it to be tar? Amru Lahem Beis Shammai. So Beis Shammai responds to him and says, when we declared the food and the beverages inside of it to be tar, don't be confused to think that we said it's tar for everybody. We said for the Amaretz it's tar. And there's a reason why we had to say it's tar for him, right? Aval. And understand that if we're allowing his food to remain, we say it's tar for him, he's going to eat it himself. But when I come along and I say that not only does it protect the food and the liquid and so on, but it also protects the other vessels, which are not earthenware vessels, of the tires that cleave, I'm going to allow it to keep pure and make pure the non-earthenware vessels. There I say it's not okay because that tahara is going to pertain to you, the chaver, as well. Okay.
I'm lost.
Okay. So let me just try to explain what's going on. We're worried, right? We're worried about the chaver. All the laws that we say that it is tar, it's not tar. Who's this for? You say we're telling the chaver whether it is tar or it isn't tar. So we say with regards to a kli cheres, if the kli cheres has things inside of it, let's say it has food or it has liquid and so on and so forth, we say that it remains tar. Now, Beis Shammai clarifies, what does it mean it remains tar? It remains tar for the Amaretz, not for you, Mr. Chaver, but for the Amaretz, it remains tar. And the Kli Cheres, we say it remains tar for you, Mr. Amaretz. However, no Chaver is ever going to come and eat the food that belongs to an Amaretz. I'm never going to eat the food that belongs to the Amaretz. Why? Because it's not going to be, because if I'm eating on the level of Truma, let's say, I don't trust the Amaretz. Fine, no problem. Likewise with the Kli Cheres, because the Kli Cheres can never be immersed into a mikvah, so I never trust any Kli Cheres that belongs to, and I never trust any Kli Cheres that belongs to a Amaretz. So therefore I say, with all of those things, it's tahar for the Amaretz, not for the chaver. When it comes to other kelim, I say it doesn't work even for the Amaretz. It doesn't work even for the Amaretz. It doesn't protect the non-earthenware vessel that's hidden inside this kli cheres. It's no good. Why is it no good? Because we say that I'm worried that you might lend it out to a chaver, and a chaver may think, right, that this kli, which is not kli cheres, which means that I could perhaps trust the Amaretz to go and immerse it into a mikvah because it is fixable, right? So therefore, I come along and I tell you that the tzamid pasul, the kli cheres that had a close thing, was not helpful, and you're going to have to take it and immerse it into a mikvah yourself. That makes sense? Anyway, we'll stop over here and we'll pick up from the Tanya tomorrow. Be'ezus Hashem. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
So we only don't trust the Kli Cheres.
Thank you, Rabbi.
We're only what? I'm sorry, Ben.
We only don't trust the Kli Cheres.
We don't we're saying that if a person has a Kli Cheres and it's closed, do we consider the things inside of it to remain tahor or not? The answer,
Not for a chaver.
so so we say it's not going to be tahor. It's going to be tahor for the Amoretz, but not for the. All right. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.